Most men try to be memorable by doing more, talking more, showing more interest, explaining more, proving more. And that is exactly why they are forgotten. Because women don't remember men who try to impress them. They remember men who change how they feel without trying. Being unforgettable has nothing to do with looks, money, or clever lines. It comes from subtle behaviors that register emotionally and stay there. The first thing you need to understand is this. Women don't remember information. They remember emotional contrast. How they felt before you, how they felt during you, how they felt after you. Most men blur into the background because they create no contrast. They are agreeable, predictable, emotionally accessible, and predictability fades quickly. The first subtle behavior that makes you unforgettable is emotional pacing. Most men rush. They rush connection, they rush intimacy, they rush familiarity, and rushing collapses memory. Unforgettable men move slower than expected, not because they are withholding, but because they are comfortable letting moments breathe. They don't rush to respond, they don't rush to agree, they don't rush to define. That slowness creates weight. Weight creates presence. Presence creates memory. Another uncomfortable truth is this. Women remember men who do not narrate their thoughts constantly. Men who don't explain what they're feeling. Men who let silence exist without anxiety. Silence creates space. Space invites projection. Projection deepens attachment. Another subtle behavior is non-reactivity to validation. Most men light up when praised. They deflate when challenged. That volatility makes them forgettable. Unforgettable men remain steady. Praise doesn't inflate them. Disapproval doesn't shrink them. That emotional consistency signals depth. Depth lingers. Another uncomfortable realization is that women remember men who do not chase emotional highs. Highs fade. Steadiness remains. Men who can hold calm while emotion moves around them feel rare, and rare things are remembered. Another subtle behavior is selective engagement. Most men respond to everything, every message, every tease, every opinion. Unforgettable men choose. They engage when it aligns. They don't react just to react. Choice signals value. Value imprints memory. Another uncomfortable truth is this. Women remember men who don't try to be understood. Needing to be understood creates urgency. Urgency weakens presence. Men who trust themselves allow misunderstanding. That confidence creates intrigue. Intrigue stays. Another subtle behavior is emotional containment. Contained emotion feels powerful. Spilled emotion feels overwhelming. Most men spill everything: their excitement, their insecurity, their desire. Unforgettable men feel deeply but leak little. That containment creates tension. Tension anchors memory. Another uncomfortable realization is that women remember men who don't emotionally lean on her. Leaning creates imbalance. Balance creates respect. Respect strengthens memory. Another subtle behavior is self-reference. Men who reference themselves instead of seeking reference from her feel grounded. Grounded men feel solid. Solid men are remembered. Another uncomfortable realization is that women remember men who don't need to be liked. Liking fades. Respect lingers. Another subtle behavior is emotional restraint during intensity. Intensity tempts men to overexpress. Unforgettable men remain calm. Calm in intensity feels powerful. Another uncomfortable truth is this. Women remember men who don't try to be unforgettable. Trying leaks insecurity. Security is memorable. Another subtle behavior is ending interactions without closure. Closure ends emotion. Open loops keep it alive. Unforgettable men allow things to remain undefined. Another uncomfortable realization is that women remember men who do not emotionally explain themselves after the fact. Explanation weakens memory. Mystery strengthens it. Another subtle behavior is consistency of self. Not consistency of texting, consistency of inner state. A man who feels the same whether she leans in or pulls away feels stable. Stability imprints. Another uncomfortable truth is that women remember men who feel rare. Rarity comes from not needing anything. Needing nothing creates space. Space allows desire to grow. Another subtle behavior is emotional independence. Independent men don't chase reactions. They let reactions come or go. That freedom feels unforgettable. Another uncomfortable realization is that women don't remember men who give them everything. They remember men who give them a feeling they can't quite name. That feeling comes from presence, from restraint, from not overreaching. And this is just the foundation. Because once you understand how memory actually forms, you realize something important. Being unforgettable is not about doing more. It's about doing less, but standing firmer. And that understanding changes how every interaction lands. Once you understand that being unforgettable is about emotional contrast, the next subtle behavior becomes obvious. Unforgettable men are emotionally consistent, but situationally unpredictable. Most men are the opposite. They are emotionally reactive, but behaviorally predictable. And predictability erases memory. An unforgettable man responds from the same inner place no matter what. Calm, grounded, self-directed. But what he says or does is never scripted. That combination creates intrigue. Another uncomfortable truth is this: women remember men who do not rush familiarity. Familiarity too early collapses polarity. Polarity fuels desire. Men who act like they've known her forever feel forgettable. Men who allow familiarity to grow slowly feel memorable. Another subtle behavior is emotional economy. Most men overspend emotionally. They give attention freely. They give validation constantly. They give reassurance on demand. Unforgettable men spend selectively, not because they are withholding, but because their attention is valuable. Value creates memory. Another uncomfortable realization is that women remember men who do not mirror their emotions. Mirroring collapses hierarchy. Hierarchy creates attraction. Unforgettable men allow emotional difference. Difference creates tension. Tension anchors memory. Another subtle behavior is non-attachment to outcome. Most men attach to outcomes quickly. They want certainty. They want direction. They want reassurance. Attachment creates pressure. Pressure erases attraction. Unforgettable men are present without expectation. Presence without expectation feels free. Freedom lingers. Another uncomfortable truth is this: women remember men who do not try to impress. Impression fades, impact remains. Unforgettable men create impact by being fully present, not by performing. Another subtle behavior is listening without agenda. Most men listen to respond. Unforgettable men listen to understand. Understanding without fixing feels rare. Rarity imprints. Another uncomfortable realization is that women remember men who do not emotionally chase closure. Closure closes emotional loops. Open loops stay alive. Unforgettable men leave conversations unfinished emotionally, not abruptly, naturally. Another subtle behavior is unhurried movement. Most men rush physically and emotionally. Rushing reveals anxiety. Unforgettable men move slowly. Slowness feels confident. Confidence is memorable. Another uncomfortable truth is this: women remember men who do not try to impress. Impression fades. Impact remains. Unforgettable men create impact by being fully present, not by performing. Another subtle behavior is listening without agenda. Most men listen to respond. Unforgettable men listen to understand. Understanding without fixing feels rare. Rarity imprints. Another uncomfortable realization is that women remember men who do not emotionally chase closure. Closure closes emotional loops. Open loops stay alive. Unforgettable men leave conversations unfinished emotionally, not abruptly, naturally. Another subtle behavior is unhurried movement. Most men rush physically and emotionally. Rushing reveals anxiety. Unforgettable men move slowly. Slowness feels confident. Confidence is memorable. Another uncomfortable truth is this: women remember men who do not feel silence to ease tension. They allow tension to exist. Tension creates emotional charge. Charge sticks. Another subtle behavior is self-sufficiency. Men who appear to need nothing feel abundant. Abundance feels attractive. Another uncomfortable realization is that women remember men who do not emotionally overinvest. Overinvestment collapses polarity. Unforgettable men invest proportionally. Balance sustains intrigue. Another subtle behavior is not asking for validation. Validation seeking reveals insecurity. Security is memorable. Another uncomfortable truth is that women remember men who end interactions on their own terms, not to play games, but because they trust their presence. Trust leaves an imprint. Another subtle behavior is emotional patience. Men who rush emotion, forgettable. Men who allow emotion to develop become memorable. Another uncomfortable realization is that women remember men who do not emotionally lean when interest appears. Leaning collapses tension. Unforgettable men stay upright. Another subtle behavior is grounded humor, not self-deprecating, not approval-seeking. Humor that comes from ease. Ease is attractive. Another uncomfortable truth is this: women remember men who do not explain their value. Value assumed feels solid. Another subtle behavior is leaving space for curiosity. Curiosity is what keeps memory alive. Another uncomfortable realization is that women remember men who are okay being a question mark. Question marks invite thought. Thought creates fixation. Another subtle behavior is not reacting to tests. Reaction makes you predictable. Non-reaction keeps intrigue alive. Another uncomfortable truth is this: women remember men who feel self-anchored. Anchored men don't drift emotionally. Drift creates forgettability. Another subtle behavior is emotional minimalism, saying less, meaning more. Another uncomfortable realization is that women remember men who don't try to be unforgettable. Trying leaks need. Need repels. Another subtle behavior is continuity of life. Unforgettable men don't pause their life for attraction. They continue. Continuation feels powerful. Another uncomfortable truth is this: memory does not form around excess. It forms around contrast, and contrast is created when a man remains grounded while everything else moves. This is why unforgettable men feel different, not because they are flashy, but because they are stable while unpredictable. And once you understand this, interactions stop feeling random. You realize memory is not built by effort. It is built by presence combined with restraint. And this brings us to the deeper layers, because unforgettable men are not just remembered. They are often thought about long after the interaction ends, and that is where the remaining behaviors quietly operate. When a man becomes unforgettable, it's rarely because of what he said. It's because of what lingered after he left. And this is where the next subtle behavior reveals itself. Unforgettable men create emotional aftertaste. Most men end interactions by exhausting everything. They say everything they feel. They explain everything they mean. They resolve everything emotionally. And once everything is resolved, there is nothing left to think about. Unforgettable men leave something unfinished, not intentionally, naturally. They don't drain the moment. They exit while the emotional energy is still alive. That lingering energy becomes memory. Another uncomfortable truth is this: women remember men who do not emotionally collapse at peaks. Peaks tempt men to overexpress excitement, connection, chemistry. Most men spill everything at the peak.
Unforgettable men contain the peak. Containment creates pressure. Pressure creates imprint. Another subtle behavior is emotional neutrality toward attraction. Most men treat attraction like a reward. They react to it, they amplify it, they chase it. Unforgettable men acknowledge attraction without letting it change their center. That neutrality feels powerful. Another uncomfortable realization is that women remember men who do not emotionally narrate their interest. Narration turns feeling into noise. Silence lets feeling echo. Another subtle behavior is not claiming ownership over the moment. Most men try to lock moments in. They label them, they define them. Unforgettable men let moments pass naturally. Unlabeled moments feel alive. Another uncomfortable truth is this: women remember men who do not emotionally anchor themselves to her response. Response dependence feels heavy. Lightness feels light. Lightness stays. Another subtle behavior is unforced exit. Men who linger too long dilute their impact. Unforgettable men leave without drama. No explanation, no apology, just continuation. Continuation creates curiosity. Another uncomfortable realization is that women remember men who do not emotionally seek confirmation afterward. No checking in, no fishing, no reassurance. That absence keeps the emotional loop open. Another subtle behavior is emotional scarcity without withholding. Scarcity created by fullness, not by games. Men who have rich inner lives feel rare. Rarity imprints. Another uncomfortable truth is this: women remember men who do not emotionally revisit moments. Revisiting kills mystery.
Mystery fuels memory. Another subtle behavior is self-directed energy. Men who return to their own world after interaction feel complete. Completion attracts thought. Another uncomfortable realization is that women remember men who do not emotionally react to distance. Distance does not threaten them. Non-reaction creates intrigue. Another subtle behavior is comfort with being unfinished. Most men want to finish the story. Unforgettable men let the story breathe. Another uncomfortable truth is this: women remember men who do not emotionally rush progression. Progression feels mechanical. Organic flow feels real. Another subtle behavior is emotional discipline, knowing what not to say, knowing what not to do. Restraint sharpens impact. Another uncomfortable realization is that women remember men who do not emotionally overstay their welcome. Presence is powerful. Overpresence dulls it. Another subtle behavior is absence without withdrawal. Absence that feels natural, not cold. Natural absence invites imagination. Another uncomfortable truth is this: women remember men who feel complete without them. Completion invites desire. Need repels. Another subtle behavior is not chasing emotional clarity. Clarity ends thought. Ambiguity sustains it. Another uncomfortable realization is that women remember men who don't emotionally reinsert themselves. They allow space. Space allows memory to grow. Another subtle behavior is ending interactions cleanly. No emotional residue, no entanglement. Clean endings feel strong. Another uncomfortable truth is this: women remember men who don't emotionally rehearse the interaction afterward. Rehearsal creates attachment. Unforgettable men move forward. Another subtle behavior is letting memory do the work. Most men try to stay relevant. Unforgettable men trust their imprint. Another uncomfortable realization is that women don't remember men who try to be unforgettable. They remember men who were fully present and then gone. That contrast is unforgettable. This is where memory stops being accidental. It becomes inevitable. Because now you're no longer leaving impressions, you're leaving echoes. And echoes are what people return to in their minds. This is where being unforgettable stops being about attraction and starts being about psychological presence. And that presence is built not by doing more, but by knowing exactly when to step back. And the next layer deepens this even further, because unforgettable men don't just leave echoes, they shape how women remember themselves in the interaction. And that changes everything. This is where unforgettable men separate themselves completely. Women don't just remember them, they remember who they were when they were with them. And that is the deepest level of imprint. Most men focus on being interesting. Unforgettable men make women feel more like themselves. Not hyped, not validated, but grounded, seen, expanded. Another uncomfortable truth is this. Women remember men who do not try to shape their emotions. They don't steer, they don't guide, they don't correct. They allow. Allowance creates safety. Safety allows authenticity. Authenticity bonds memory. Another subtle behavior is emotional permission. Unforgettable men give women permission to feel without reacting to it. Sadness can exist, excitement can exist, silence can exist. Nothing needs to be fixed. That freedom is rare, and rare experiences are remembered. Another uncomfortable realization is that women remember men who don't emotionally interrupt. Most men interrupt with solutions, with stories, with validation. Unforgettable men let emotions complete themselves. Completion feels relieving. Relief lingers. Another subtle behavior is non-intrusive presence. Being there without inserting yourself. Listening without claiming. That restraint feels respectful. Respect deepens memory. Another uncomfortable truth is this. Women remember men who don't emotionally compete. Not with other men, not with their past, not with their emotions. Competition feels tense. Non-competition feels spacious. Another subtle behavior is not needing to be special. Men who try to be special feel common. Men who are at ease feel distinct. Ease imprints. Another uncomfortable realization is that women remember men who do not emotionally harvest reactions. No fishing for compliments, no seeking reassurance, no checking impact. That independence feels strong. Another subtle behavior is emotional neutrality toward her past. Judgment creates resistance. Neutrality creates openness. Openness bonds memory. Another uncomfortable truth is this. Women remember men who don't emotionally anchor to outcomes. They don't need dates to mean something. They don't need moments to lead somewhere. Meaninglessness creates freedom. Freedom creates desire. Another subtle behavior is holding space without claiming it. You are present, but not possessive. That balance feels safe. Another uncomfortable realization is that women remember men who don't emotionally chase alignment. Alignment, forced, feels artificial. Alignment allowed feels real. Another subtle behavior is calm disagreement. Disagreement without emotional charge. Charge creates conflict. Calm creates respect. Respect anchors memory. Another uncomfortable truth is this. Women remember men who don't emotionally perform empathy. They simply listen. Performance feels hollow. Presence feels real. Another subtle behavior is not rescuing discomfort. Discomfort teaches self-trust. Men who allow it empower. Empowerment is unforgettable. Another uncomfortable realization is that women remember men who don't emotionally absorb their moods. Absorption creates instability. Stability creates safety. Another subtle behavior is being unremarkable on purpose. Not dull, unforced, no peaks, no drops. That emotional flatness allows depth to emerge. Another uncomfortable truth is this. Women remember men who don't emotionally claim credit for how she feels. Ownership feels intrusive. Allowance feels respectful. Another subtle behavior is remaining self-contained even in closeness. Closeness tempts men to merge. Unforgettable men remain intact. Intact presence feels strong. Another uncomfortable realization is that women remember men who don't emotionally linger after sharing. They let moments land. Landing creates imprint. Another subtle behavior is not reframing emotions. Reframing invalidates experience. Acceptance validates without words. Another uncomfortable truth is this: women remember men who don't emotionally interrupt their internal process. Process respected becomes memory. Another subtle behavior is leaving women feeling more grounded than before. Grounding is rare. Rare experiences are unforgettable. This is why unforgettable men are often described as calming, not boring, not passive, but stabilizing. And stabilization is deeply attractive, because in a world of emotional noise, stability feels like relief, and relief is remembered. This is the layer most men never reach because it requires doing less, not more. Holding space, not filling it. Remaining intact, not merging. And when you embody us, women don't just remember you. They associate you with clarity, with ease, with feeling more themselves. And that association is powerful, because people always return mentally to places where they felt most like themselves. Which brings us to the final layer, because unforgettable men don't just create memory, they create long-term psychological presence. And that is where everything comes together. At the deepest level, being unforgettable has nothing to do with attraction tactics. It has everything to do with psychological presence. Women don't remember men who try to leave a mark. They remember men who became part of their internal landscape. That only happens when a man is fully present without needing anything in return. Another uncomfortable truth is this: unforgettable men are not constantly on a woman's mind because they chased her. They're on her mind because they didn't. They allowed space. And space is where imagination works. Another deep truth is that women remember men who trust memory to do the work. They don't keep reminding. They don't reinsert themselves. They let absence amplify presence. Another uncomfortable realization is that unforgettable men don't try to be relevant. They remain rooted in their own life. Rooted men feel real. Reality lingers. Another deep truth is that women remember men who don't emotionally collapse into availability. Availability without boundaries feels common. Bounded availability feels rare. Another uncomfortable realization is that unforgettable men do not emotionally revisit the interaction. They don't replay it. They don't analyze it. They move forward. Movement creates gravity. Another deep truth is that women remember men who don't emotionally chase emotional closure. Closure ends desire. Open-endedness sustains it. Another uncomfortable realization is that unforgettable men don't need to be perfect. They need to be consistent in self. Consistency creates trust. Trust deepens memory. Another deep truth is that women remember men who make them feel calm without feeling controlled. Calm plus freedom equals safety. Safety anchors attachment. Another uncomfortable realization is that unforgettable men do not emotionally chase certainty. Certainty kills curiosity. Curiosity keeps memory alive. Another deep truth is that women remember men who don't emotionally seek reassurance. Reassurance seeking creates pressure. Pressure erases imprint. Another uncomfortable realization is that unforgettable men don't try to own her attention. They allow her attention to move freely. Freedom makes attention return. Another deep truth is that women remember men who don't emotionally anchor themselves to how they're perceived. Perception dependence feels fragile. Independence feels strong. Another uncomfortable realization is that unforgettable men are not dramatic. They are grounded. Grounding is rare. Rare experiences imprint. Another deep truth is that women remember men who feel complete without needing to prove it. Completion invites desire. Need repels. Another uncomfortable realization is that unforgettable men don't rush future plans. They let connection breathe. Breathing space creates longevity. Another deep truth is that women remember men who don't emotionally take from moments. They contribute presence. Presence leaves residue. Another uncomfortable realization is that unforgettable men don't force emotional highs. They allow natural depth. Depth lasts longer than excitement. Another deep truth is that women remember men who are emotionally sovereign. Sovereignty is magnetic. Another uncomfortable realization is that unforgettable men don't cling to identity. They remain fluid without losing center. That balance is rare. Another deep truth is that women remember men who leave interactions clean. No emotional debris, no pressure, just clarity. Another uncomfortable realization is that unforgettable men don't need to stay in her life to stay in her mind. They trust their imprint. Another deep truth is this: being unforgettable is not about being intense, it's about being real without intrusion. Another uncomfortable realization is that women remember men who do not emotionally shrink to be remembered. Shrinking erases presence. Standing quietly sustains it. Another deep truth is that unforgettable men are not remembered for what they gave. They were remembered for how they left things feeling open, and openness is where thought returns. Now, if this video finally helped you understand what makes a man linger in a woman's mind long after the interaction ends, there is one video you should watch next. Because being unforgettable only works when it's built on the right foundation. That foundation is respect. And that's exactly what I break down in my video called "The One Behavior That Makes Women Respect You Instantly." That video shows how self-command, non-reactivity, and emotional firmness create the kind of respect that makes presence last. Watch that next. Because once respect anchors attraction and presence replaces effort, you stop trying to be unforgettable. You simply become someone who cannot be erased.